The entire spectacle of the premiere stopped when Marilyn Monroe spotted 2 security men brutally seizing an old man in the crowd, and what she did next was so unthinkable that the entire studio tried to cover it up. She sacrificed millions in publicity and risked her entire career, all because this man held the forgotten secret of the vulnerable girl named Norma Jean she once was. The heat of the California night was nothing compared to the white-hot inferno surrounding Marilyn Monroe. It was the premiere of her biggest picture yet, and as she stepped out of the limousine, the roar of the crowd was less applause and more like the sound of a beautiful cage slamming shut. The entire world was looking at a goddess sculpted in diamonds and silk, yet no one was truly looking at the woman underneath. October 6, 1956, a night where Hollywood's Gilded Age was on full, dazzling display. This was not a film premiere, it was a coronation. The street was lined with 5 layers of police barricades. Marilyn was wearing a dress the color of moonlight, controlled and ensured. She moved like a perfectly crafted machine, the famous smile pasted on, the wave practiced and precise, a beautiful prisoner playing the role of the free queen. She saw the flashbulb as 1,000 tiny pinpricks of light that kept her from seeing clearly. The noise was too loud, the control too absolute, and the proximity to so many people only made her feel profoundly, desperately alone. For the studio executives, this was the pinnacle of their financial dream. Every second Marilyn spent bathed in that light was money in the bank. They had created the ultimate spectacle, and she was the centerpiece, the golden goose. The handlers, the publicists, the burly security men in their dark suits, they were the walls of the golden cage, protecting their investment. She glanced across the screaming mass, scanning the barricade, not for a famous face, but for a moment of quiet, a single, normal, human pair of eyes that might look at her and see Norma Jean. She saw none. She saw greed, obsession, and frantic adulation. The handlers were rushing her toward the theater doors. "Keep it moving, Marilyn," whispered her publicist. "We're losing time. Don't look at them." But she did look. In the dense throng near the far right corner where the lighting was poor, she saw one old gentleman. He wasn't screaming. He was standing perfectly still, holding something small and white against his chest, watching the chaos with profound weariness. He looked entirely out of place. She was forced to turn toward the door. Just as she was swept past the final velvet rope, she felt a slight tug toward that dark corner. The old man suddenly tried to step past the barricade, clutching his small object tighter. The look of quiet dignity on his face was replaced by a flash of desperate urgency. And before Marilyn's eyes could even register the change, 2 massive security men in dark suits descended upon him, seizing him by the arms as if he were a threat to national security itself. She felt the heavy theater door close behind her, shutting out the roar of the crowd, but the image of that old man being roughly handled in the shadows was all she could see. The studio had successfully protected their icon, but Marilyn felt a prickle of cold dread. She heard a final, loud, sickening thud of the bronze door sealing her in. The quiet despair she had just witnessed was more real than anything in the premiere, and the star knew the brutal erasure of that old man's dignity was a crime she could not forgive. If Marilyn was the golden light of the premiere, then Arthur Vance was the quiet shadow waiting patiently in the dark, carrying the crushing weight of a tragedy he couldn't afford. He wasn't there for fame. He was there to return a kindness to Norma Jean. His mission was a desperate, final gamble to save the small house that was his only legacy. Arthur was 78 years old. He had been a prop master's assistant at struggling studios back in the 1940s, the kind of essential, invisible crew member who made Hollywood run. For 3 months, he had been fighting off foreclosure. His late wife's terminal care had left him buried under mountainous debt, and the bank had given him 2 weeks to settle the balance or lose the small house they had shared for 40 years. Arthur remembered Norma Jean. Not the dazzling star, but the scared, lonely girl who sometimes went without a decent meal. One cold, rainy night when she was working late as an extra and her old Ford coupe sputtered and stopped on Sunset Boulevard, Arthur had been the one to stop and help. He didn't recognize the future icon. He only saw a distressed young woman. He fixed the car and slipped her a $5 bill. She had cried, not from hunger, but from the simple, unexpected grace of a stranger's humanity. She had repaid him a week later with a small, heartfelt card, the one Arthur was now clutching. It was a simple note on dime store paper thanking him for seeing her as a person. He couldn't sell the note. It was a testament to the fact that he had once been a good man, capable of a grand gesture of help. He hadn't come to beg. He came only to show her the note, to offer her a simple thank you for not forgetting where you came from, hoping that somehow the real Norma Jean might see it and help him negotiate with the bank, using her name to save his dignity. He knew his hope was fragile. He had waited for 4 hours, his old bones aching, for the briefest glimpse, the slightest opportunity. As Marilyn was ushered into the darkness of the theater, Arthur felt the chance slipping away. He had to try. He took one. Deep breath, his knuckles white around the faded cardstock, and made the single foolish step past the metal barricade, hoping that someone would see the dignity in his gesture before they saw the threat. The action was immediate, harsh, and devastatingly efficient. He felt the cold, impersonal grip on his arm before he could utter a single word. The entire crowd fell into an uncomfortable hush right around the incident. The guards were dragging him toward a nondescript van. Arthur tried to pull his arms free, not out of aggression, but to save the precious folded card that had fallen from his grip. He watched in slow motion as the yellowed note, signed by Norma Jean, fluttered down like a tiny defeated bird landing near the curb. The shame was overwhelming. All the quiet pride he had carried was instantly replaced by the searing public humiliation of being treated like a criminal. He was stripped of his voice, his purpose, and his simple wish. He started to plead, a low, choked sound. "The card, please, the card, it's important." As Arthur was roughly hustled away, he craned his neck, taking one last desperate glance toward the dirty, unforgiving pavement where his fragile connection to Norma Jean lay discarded. Just as the guards pulled him into the shadows, Arthur saw the tread of the black van's tire edge dangerously close to the fallen note. The heavy bronze doors of the Premier Theater opened again. It was a lone figure who stepped back into the blinding light, a publicist with a look of frantic, wide-eyed alarm etched onto his face. He was searching for the star who was supposed to be safely inside her screening, but who was instead inexplicably missing. The machine had moved on, but its centerpiece had just vanished. Section 4. The Icon's Gaze. Marilyn was already halfway down the velvet-roped aisle when the tiny internal alarm went off in her soul. She knew that the gentle flicker of the old man she had glimpsed had been violently extinguished. All the light and noise focused on a single point of rough, unexpected pain. She paused mid-step. The studio chief kept walking for a half-second before realizing she was no longer there. Marilyn wasn't looking at him or the flashing cameras. She was looking back at the heavy bronze doors, hearing the phantom echoes of a struggle. She had spent a lifetime learning to spot the difference between genuine emotion and a staged act, and the quiet distress of that old man felt utterly, terribly real. In her mind's eye, the chaotic beauty of the red carpet outside was suddenly replaced by a black and white photograph, a vulnerable figure in the shadows. She saw the fear in his eyes. Not the fear of an obsessed fan, but the primal fear of a person being dismissed, discarded, and treated as less than human. It was a look she carried in her own heart every day. That fear, projected onto a frail 78-year-old gentleman, was unbearable. Her publicist, Roger, hurried back to her. "Marilyn, what are you doing? We have to go in. You're holding up the entire theater." Marilyn, still staring at the doors, spoke without turning. "Someone was hurt." "No one was hurt," Roger said smoothly. "Just a minor incident. Security handled it. An unruly person who broke the barrier. They're removing him now. It's over. Removing him." The casual cruelty of the phrase resonated. She pictured the small, worn card the man had been clutching, now likely crushed. She suddenly felt a surge of absolute certainty. The unruly person was not the old man. The unruly person was the machine that had just snatched him out of the light. She realized she was the only one who could stop it. She turned and faced Roger, her eyes no longer the vacant, rehearsed blue of the celebrity, but the sharp, steel-blue eyes of Norma Jean making a terrible decision. "I need to see him," she stated, her voice soft, yet cutting through the low hum of the lobby. "Absolutely not, Marilyn," Roger hissed. "He's been designated a threat. The show starts in 3 minutes. We have a schedule." She gently, but firmly, removed her arm from his grasp. The small movement was a complete rejection of his control. "No," she whispered, and the single word was heavier than the heavy bronze doors. She took a purposeful step toward the doors, her diamond heels clicking loudly on the marble floor. She was walking away from the premiere, heading toward the shadows where a small piece of the past was being destroyed. The security guard rushed to stop her, but he hesitated, staring at the raw determination on her face. Marilyn Monroe was gone. All that remained was a fierce young woman with a long memory. She pushed the heavy door open herself, stepping back out into the cacophony. Did this story touch your heart and make you think of a time someone stood up for the unseen? Please drop a comment below and share your own story about a moment of unexpected kindness. The light of the exterior flashes hit her like a physical blow, yet she walked through it. She pushed through the line of security, heading directly for the dark corner where she had last seen the old man being dragged away. She was Marilyn Monroe, and she was about to make a scene that Hollywood would never forgive, all for the sake of a man whose name she did not yet know. She stepped off the red carpet and onto the cold, hard sidewalk, a physical movement that felt like a rupture in time and space. Marilyn Monroe was walking with a clear, driven purpose, transforming from a studio asset into a fully human force, and the sheer momentum of her intention stopped the entire machine of Hollywood. The flashbulbs hesitated, stuttered, and then almost entirely ceased. Photographers were momentarily paralyzed by the sight of the star ignoring their presence and marching toward the darkness. Her publicist, Roger, finally broke through the crowd. "Marilyn, for God's sake, they're waiting inside. You cannot interfere with security." Marilyn did not even slow down. She simply pulled her arm away. This was the line she would not allow them to cross. The dignity of an old, vulnerable man was more important than the gross revenue of any film. She rounded the end of the police barricade and saw the scene in sickening clarity. Arthur Vance, his back bowed, being dragged toward a black van. The faded white card lay on the ground. "Stop!" The sound of her voice, though not screamed, was amplified by the sudden, terrifying silence of the crowd. The two massive guards froze instantly. They turned, their expressions shifting from brutal focus to bewildered terror. They were not used to having Marilyn Monroe standing in the glare of the streetlights, looking at them with a gaze that stripped away their authority. Marilyn walked right up to them. She didn't raise her voice, but the quiet command in her tone was absolute. "Release him. Now." The guard stammered. "Miss Monroe, he was disturbing the peace. He breached the perimeter. We were just removing a threat. We have orders." Marilyn took another step closer, her voice now a low, chilling threat that only they could hear. "I know your names. I know your boss. You release him now, or you will spend tomorrow looking for new employment in a new state. Do not touch that man again. He is under my protection." She then directed her attention to Arthur, who was staring up at her, confused and shaking, unable to process that the goddess of the screen had materialized to rescue him. "Sir," she said, her voice dropping to an intimate, conversational level, ignoring the guards. "Are you all right?" Arthur could only manage a slow, shaky nod. He was still fixed on the ground where his precious letter lay. Marilyn then turned to the guards, her expression one of withering dismissal. She didn't demand they leave. She simply commanded the space. "Go," she said, gesturing toward the back of the crowd. "Your services are not needed here." The security men, utterly defeated by the public spotlight and the threat to their livelihood, immediately released Arthur's arms, dropped their heads in submission, and retreated into the darkness. Arthur swayed slightly, rubbing his throbbing shoulder, overwhelmed by the dizzying shift in fortune. He had been a criminal. Now he was under the protection of Hollywood royalty, yet he still hadn't accomplished his mission. The entire crowd was silent, cameras now furiously documenting the unscripted miracle of the star kneeling. Marilyn knelt down, regardless of the costly gown, her beautiful face now at Arthur's eye level. She had defeated the machine, but now she had to find out why this man was important enough to risk everything. She had seen the distress in his eyes. Now she had to know the secret of his silent suffering. Marilyn knelt in the dirt, entirely heedless of the cameras or the frantic publicists. For Arthur Vance, she was simply the girl who needed kindness so long ago, and she was now utterly, heartbreakingly just Norma Jean. She saw the terror still trembling in Arthur's eyes and knew the greatest gift she could give him was her authenticity. Her hand reached out gently, resting on his shaking shoulder. "Sir, please tell me your name." "Arthur," he whispered, his voice rough with shock and tears. "Arthur Vance?" Marilyn smiled, and it was not the rehearsed grin of the movie star, but a small, tender expression of deep recognition. "Arthur," she repeated, "thank you for coming. It's Norma Jean." That was the key. Not Marilyn. Norma Jean. The three simple words shattered the wall of confusion Arthur had built up. His eyes, seconds ago filled with pain and fear, now welled up with profound emotion. He had achieved his mission. The star had recognized the man. He tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. I just wanted to tell you something." he finally managed, his gaze fixed on the ground where his precious object lay. Marilyn followed his eyes and quickly spotted the small, cream-colored rectangle of paper. She scooped it up carefully and handed it back to him. Arthur clutched it fiercely, a gasp of relief escaping his lips. "This is the card," he whispered. "The one you gave me." She looked at the yellowed cardstock, and the real, raw memories of being cold, broke, and desperately alone flooded her mind. She remembered the kindness of a quiet, tired man who didn't want anything from her. Arthur, encouraged by her silence, began to explain. "It was 1944, Norma Jean. Your car broke down. I gave you $5 for dinner. You wrote this note. I wanted you to know I still have it. I wanted to thank you for keeping your heart kind." The truth was a sudden, powerful blow. Arthur hadn't come to beg for money or fame. He had come to affirm her goodness. The contrast between his pure intention and the calculating greed of the security guards was devastating. Marilyn felt her celebrity shell crack completely. "Arthur," she murmured, "I remember. You were the only one who didn't ask me to smile. You just asked if I was warm enough." Her eyes were now glistening with unshed tears. She reached out, covering his hand which still clutched the precious note. The crowd watched in stunned silence, realizing they were witnessing something real. In that simple, profound connection, Marilyn found a moment of genuine human respite. It was time to repay a debt that transcended money, fame, or even time itself. This is the moment of pure, unscripted humanity. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to remember that the greatest kindness is often the most forgotten. Marilyn rose slowly, helping Arthur up with a steadying hand. She looked past him, past the flashing bulbs, and saw her publicist, Roger, frozen in panic. She gave Arthur one last intense look that promised him he was safe and that the weight of the world was about to be lifted from his shoulders. The public part of the debt was paid. The private, enduring part would require a secret action that would truly shock Hollywood and restore Arthur's dignity forever. The crowd, sensing the conclusion, began to surge. But Marilyn wasn't done. She had been given $5 for a hot meal 20 years ago. She was about to return a king's ransom in dignity. Marilyn gently took Arthur's hand in both of hers. She looked straight into the camera lens and, for the benefit of the world, she gave him a long, genuine, tearful embrace. She then signed his precious card, "Norma Jean, with unending thanks." She made sure the entire crowd saw the public gesture of pure grace. Then she pulled back, turning her back just slightly to block the view. She looked directly into his eyes, her voice dropping to a low, intense whisper. "Arthur, I remember everything. Your $5 bought me hope. That debt has to be repaid." Arthur tried to protest, insisting her recognition was enough, but Marilyn pressed a small, folded piece of thick, personalized stationery into his palm. It felt substantial and real. The paper was the color of fresh cream. Arthur felt the warm pressure of her thumbs securing it in his grip. "This is not charity, Arthur," she insisted. "This is a debt. You call this number. You call it tomorrow morning. Ask for George." Arthur, overwhelmed, looked down at the paper. He instinctively thought it might be a $50 bill. The note contained her unlisted private phone number and a single line written in her clear, distinctive hand. "Arthur, you are safe. Call me when you are ready to talk about the house. Love, Norma Jean." The reference to his house, a secret he had told no one, shook him to his core. What mattered was the pure, perfect sincerity of her attention. She squeezed his hand one last time, imparting a silent instruction. "Keep this secret." She then looked over his shoulder, catching the terrified gaze of Roger, who was staring in horror. "Arthur," Marilyn said, her public voice returning, gentle but final. "You have your card, and you have your dignity. Please go home safely. We will talk soon." With one final, gracious wave, she turned and glided back toward the theater entrance. She had given the man a promise of deliverance, a secret safety net. It was the purest act of love she could offer, a secret, private promise to use her immense power to ensure one forgotten man would never fear being discarded again. The public got a heartwarming photo. Arthur got his life back. This secret exchange changed everything for Arthur. Don't miss the dramatic fallout and the final tear-jerking payoff. Hit that subscribe button right now to continue the journey of Marilyn's secret heart. As the massive bronze doors closed behind Marilyn, Arthur stood alone in the dim light. He was holding the original yellowed card, but clutched even tighter was the small, folded note that felt like the winning lottery ticket to his soul. The harsh grip of the security guards was forgotten. The only thing that mattered was the warm indentation of Norma Jean's thumbprint on the paper in his hand. Marilyn stepped back into the theater lobby, and the quiet reverence was replaced by the fury of the machine. She had chosen human kindness over cinematic commerce, and Hollywood was absolutely, financially, and professionally outraged. Roger, her publicist, was waiting for her, his face a mask of purple-tinged hysteria. He grabbed her arm, dragging her into a curtained alcove. The studio chief and the film's director joined them, their whispers harsh and venomous. "What in God's name was that, Marilyn?" the director hissed. "You spent 10 minutes kneeling in the dirt with some vagrant. Do you have any idea what the money you just cost us?" The studio chief chimed in, his voice tight with financial panic. "That man was a liability. You undermined our authority. We specifically told you not to engage with the riffraff." Marilyn stood perfectly still. "That man's name is Arthur Vance," she said calmly. "He is not riffraff. He is a gentleman who showed Norma Jean kindness when none of you were even looking at me." Roger, unable to contain his frustration, pulled a stack of personalized note cards from his jacket pocket and dramatically tore them in half. "You just lost the Goodwill Tour. We are officially pulling you from the European press conference next week. You will not speak to the media until we can spin this as a planned, calculated charity move." They didn't care. They didn't understand. Their language was money, control, and publicity. Her language was memory, empathy, and humanity. To them, the incident was a PR nightmare. This was Hollywood's bitter lesson. To these powerful men, a sincere heart was nothing more than a dangerous liability. They only saw the interruption of their schedule. The irony was devastating. The executives finally retreated, having delivered their threats, leaving Marilyn alone. The glamorous images and scripted lines were hollow. The lost tour, the canceled press, the knowledge that she would be held prisoner in Hollywood, all because she had dared to be a human being for one brief moment. All she could see was Arthur's trembling face, the light of gratitude in his eyes, and the small folded paper now safe in his pocket. She knew she had made the correct choice, even if it meant facing the cold fury of the men who controlled her career. The spectacle was over, but the real story was just beginning. Outside, the cynical world slept, but miles away, a simple elderly man was waking up to a dawn that carried a completely different price tag. The value of a debt secretly repaid, ensuring that his dignity would be permanently restored. Arthur Vance carried the small, folded note like a sacred relic. Weeks passed after the premiere, and the warmth of Norma Jean's promise remained, glowing like a small, unbreakable ember in the darkness of his life. The morning after the premiere, Arthur had followed Marilyn's instructions. He called the number, answered by George, a man with a steady, kind voice who treated Arthur's small financial troubles with solemn seriousness. George was a silent, efficient shadow of Norma Jean's private world, dedicated to her quiet acts of justice. Arthur felt the humiliation melt away. He was not begging. He was merely accepting the repayment of a debt that only 2 people in the world understood. He explained his situation simply, and George listened patiently. "Mr. Vance?" George had said on the phone, his voice steady. Miss Monroe was clear. "This payment is for $5 plus 2 decades of interest owed to Mr. Vance. It will cover all medical debts and secure the property. Consider the debt fully settled." The funds cleared quickly through a quiet legal transaction managed by an anonymous firm. The funds cleared the medical expenses, paid off the back taxes, and settled the mortgage in full. Arthur Vance was no longer facing ruin. He was simply an elderly gentleman who owned his house, finally given the peace of mind to live out his days with the dignity he deserved. The entire transaction was handled with such discretion that no one ever learned the source of his sudden, life-changing fortune. Marilyn had ensured that her kindness was entirely unexploitable. She hadn't bought herself good press. She had bought Arthur a future. Arthur was careful to never call the number again. He knew the terms of the exchange. Recognition was public, but the generosity was to remain a profound, private secret between him and Norma Jean. Years later, Arthur was sitting on his porch watching his grandson, a boy of 10, playing. The boy asked his grandfather what Marilyn Monroe was really like. Arthur pulled the precious yellowed card from a locked drawer. The faint ink signature of Norma Jean was still visible. She was kind, Arthur told his grandson. He recounted the story of the broken-down car, the $5, and the note, but he stopped short of revealing the truth of the premiere and the money. That part, the gift that truly changed his life, he kept locked safely in his heart. He often thought back to the moment on the street and the humiliation he felt as the whole world turned away. But that memory was now entirely overshadowed by the image of Marilyn Monroe, kneeling in her $1 million dress, seeing him not as a threat or a fan, but as Arthur, the man who had seen Norma Jean. He had come to the premiere hoping to offer her gratitude. She had returned it with a silent miracle that restored his faith in the world. That day on the red carpet was not about a Hollywood star saving a fan. It was about the repayment of a human debt. Arthur's final years were filled with peace and quiet joy, a profound testament to the power of a secret promise kept by the most visible woman in the world. The cynical world never understood the depth of Marilyn's heart. But Arthur Vance knew the truth. He knew that the greatest gift she gave him was a simple, secret knowledge that he mattered. The iconic image from that night, the one that ran in every newspaper, was not of Marilyn waving, but of her kneeling. Everyone thought it was a stage stunt, but the world completely misread the final frame. That photograph captured the most honest moment of her entire career. We live in a world obsessed with surface, with headlines, and with calculated charity. We judge success by how many followers a person has. But on that night, Marilyn Monroe reminded us that the true measure of a person is not how brightly they shine in the spotlight, but how quickly they step out of it to illuminate the forgotten shadows. She wasn't performing life. She was living it, using her legendary power for quiet protection. The studio heads were furious that she stopped the show for a nobody, but they misunderstood the transaction. Arthur Vance was a gatekeeper to her past, a living reminder of the fundamental goodness she almost lost in the clamor of fame. He had offered her simple help when she was nothing, and her act was merely the repayment of that sacred debt, proving that she had carried the memory of that kindness in her heart for 20 years. That is loyalty. That is character. Arthur came to the premiere to remind Norma Jean of her humanity. He left with the quiet knowledge that his own dignity had been fiercely restored by the most famous woman in the world. He was saved by the remembered heart of Norma Jean. She chose to face the cameras, challenge the security guards, and risk the wrath of the studio, all to look him in the eye and say, "I remember." That moment of recognition, that willingness to prioritize one trembling old man over her career, was the ultimate act of courage. The secret note she placed in his hand, that single small piece of paper that solved his financial woes, remained a mystery. The cynical world continued to believe their own superficial headlines. But Arthur and George knew the truth, that behind the diamonds and the dazzling persona was a woman committed to making things right. Her final gift was not the money, but the silence. By ensuring the transaction remained private, she preserved Arthur's dignity and demonstrated that her act was pure, uncalculated love. The question the world should have asked that night was not, why did she do it? But how many of us would risk everything we have to save the dignity of a forgotten stranger? Marilyn Monroe showed us that the greatest form of love is to simply see someone who has been rendered invisible by the world. Arthur Vance used his quiet dignity to reach out to his hero, but Marilyn used her legendary fame to lift up a piece of her past. She taught us that the people who need our help the most are rarely the ones screaming in the spotlight. They are the quiet ones in the shadows. The world obsessed over the stars' tears on the red carpet, but Arthur knew the real miracle was the secret, uncalculated promise written on that piece of paper by Norma Jean. She gave the world a show, but she gave Arthur a second chance at life. If this story of secret kindness and forgotten dignity touched your heart, then do what Marilyn did. Make a connection. Hit the subscribe button to honor the true, unscripted moments of Hollywood history, and give this video a chance to share Norma Jean's enduring spirit with the world.